Stevenson, nothing Humphrey, nothing Averill Harriman, John Stuart Mill, nil, Franklin Delano, nothing, Carlos Marx, nothing, Engels, nothing, Bakunin, Kropotkin,
The Fugs were an underground rock band initially from New York. They had an initial stint of existence from 1964 to 1969. They reformed in 1984 and are still going. They were formed by a couple of poets who added musicians to them, and they were particularly known for being countercultural and quite explicit, certainly for the times in the early years. They were mentioned in an FBI file that was actually about the Doors as being the most vulgar thing that the human mind could possibly conceive. This was the 60s. They have released, I think, 11 albums, but it's a bit complicated to work out. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was the first album of by the Fugs, and as you can tell by the name. However, it is a re-release of an album that had been released the year before, which was called The Village Fugs Sing Ballads of Contemporary Protest, Points of View and General Dissatisfaction, which is a great name for an album. And I think the Fugs' first album is a less good name for that album. It's my first encounter with them, and therefore, of course, with this album. And I would describe it as being somewhat bizarre, I have to say. Well, let's try and do better than that. It's kind of folk rock crossed with lo-fi and bits of noise rock, but also a very kind of a scatological sense of humour, there's satire. It's kind of like what you might get from Frank Zappa if he had no skill at all. I say no skill, there is a little bit of skill in here, but mostly you get the impression that musically they are unconcerned with the lack of particular skill. Some of the tracks have got, a classic kind of rock setup with guitar, bass, drums, singing. Most of the singing is collective, so several people singing at once, and mostly it's out of tune. The playing, some of it's out of tune, and it's quite basic, some of it's out of time. It's all very kind of rough and ready and garagey, and it kind of sounds like first recordings that somebody might make at high school, just kind of messing about with a band and having fun and trying to get something going. Some of the tracks sound different even to that. So some tracks sound more like singing or chanting, with people playing things like hand drums, swanny whistles, harmonica, kind of in snatches, and they're making noises rather than music. It's just kind of a general backing of noisiness, even though if they are using musical instruments. Probably the most extreme example of that is Swinburne's Stomp, which audibly is quite an interesting track, I would say. Despite the lack of musical skill or even even presence to the singing, is not kind of got a great amount of charisma to it. There is still, however, something really enduring about it, which is I found interesting. So the first kind of 2 or 3 tracks, when I listened to it through the first time, I was going, why on earth is this in this list? And then I started to get it, and it's really about the content. There's a satirical sense of humour going on here. There's references to drugs and some kind of X-rated references. There's certainly words that you would not have expected to be in music that was released in the 60s. And then behind it all and with it all, there's this kind of, humour and aggressive psychedelic, that's the word I'm looking for, attitude. They got into, I believe, some trouble for the track I Couldn't Get High, because it has some very explicit drug references in it. Possibly my favourite track is Supergirl, which is an interestingly structured song, and it's basically around the line of I want a girl who can X like a Y, and it starts out fairly straightforward, but some examples from later on in the song is it just gets really weird and bizarre. So I want a girl who can walk like a fountain, touch like a flower, and sing like the leaves of grass. And in another verse, I want a girl who can kiss like an eagle. Well, the only thing I can think of for that it must be referring to a peck on the cheek, maybe. I also really like the track Nothing, which is later on the album, which is a rambling exploration of lots of things that they say are nothing. They start off with Monday nothing, Tuesday nothing, etc. And then move on into numbers and months and days of the year and political people and types of art and all sorts of things. And they're just basically is a nihilistic song, basically. But it's just funny in the way that he goes about it. So for me, the qualities here are in the attitude and the songwriting. The style is still very rough, but it grew on me. And by the time I was kind of listening to bits whilst I was writing this up, I was actually feeling quite affectionate towards it as an album. So I'm still not sure I would deliberately seek it out to listen to again, though. After this review, we'll see. So it's an interesting album. It definitely made me think. And as always at this point, I'd like to invite you to tell me what you think of this album, and you can do so by leaving me a comment. And that's it from me for now.
I want a girl that can kiss like a cherry, squeeze like a berry.